Hi, my name is Danielle Cody, and I will be going over the hospital charge data set. This data set can be found on data.gov, and the description of this data set is data are being released that shows significant variation across the country and within communities in which providers charge for common services. These data include information comparing the charges for the 100 most common inpatient services and 30 common outpatient services. Providers determine what they will charge for items and services provided to patients, and these charges are the amount the providers bill for an item or service. The data included in this set is the DRG definition, and that's the description of the procedure. The provider ID, which is like a hospital, the provider name, the street, city, state, and zip code, the provider HRR, which is the hospital referral region where the provider is located, total discharges, the number of discharges billed by the provider for inpatient hospital services, average covered charges, which will be a main metric in our analysis. This is the provider's average charge for services covered by Medicare for all discharges in the MS-DRG, and these vary from hospital to hospital because of differences in hospital charge structures. Also, average total payments, which are the average total payments to all providers for the MS-DRG, including the MS-DRG amount, teach-in, disproportionate share, capital, and outlier payments for all cases. And it also includes co-payments and deductible amounts. And then the average Medicare payments, and that's the average amount Medicare pays to the provider. I wanted to go over this because there are a lot of hospital strikes currently happening, and this is one I found locally in Connecticut. My mom's a nurse, and nurses are striking because hospitals are charging so much for procedures, and Medicare is not covering it, so patients usually can't cover it, so hospitals are going into debt, and to save the hospital, they end up taking money away from nurses and people that work at the hospital. So this is a very current issue for this kind of business. And if you want to read the article, here it is. It just talks about nursing homes going into strikes for the same reason that this data is released. The government wanted this data released so that it could be looked at and it could be fixed. So let's start by looking at it. Again, I wanted to look at this because my mom talks about hospital strikes all the time, and I don't really understand it because I'm not current with these kind of issues. So I figured doing an analysis like this would be beneficial for people that aren't really current with Medicaid and all that kind of stuff. So in this data set, I first wanted to look at the record counts by state and procedure. So these are the top record counts in California, Texas, Florida, the bigger states. And these are the top procedures. We got simple pneumonia, kidney and urinary tract infections, heart failure and shock with CC. But what I really wanted to do was focus on something, and I thought it would be a good idea to focus on Connecticut because that's where our university is from. So if we look at what Connecticut looks like, so Connecticut has 2011 records. So it's a pretty decent sized data set that we can work with and compare it to the whole United States. So Connecticut's top 3 procedures with 31 records each are respiratory infections, simple pneumonia, and renal failure. So we might want to concentrate on these top 3 and compare it to the rest of the country. So that's what we're going to do. Now, looking at the data, this box and whisker plot, and right here we have the average coverage, the average Medicare, and the average total payments. And if you look, this is the whole country, and you can't really see much here, but it is as if the average total payments and the average Medicare, it ranges from 0K to 150K. But then when you look at the average covered payments, it goes from 0 to 500K. And that's the main problem here, because these procedures are costing a lot of money, and the Medicare payments are nothing when compared to these payments. So when the patient gets billed for the outstanding amount, usually they can't cover it, and the hospitals have to cover it themselves, and that's where the problem's coming from. So, okay, let's go back to Connecticut. And this is a good example because you can see better. So look at the span of this box and whisker, and then look at the span of this. Look at how close these are. So Medicare is paying the same amount, really, but these hospitals, they're varying bills. So Medicare is constantly paying around the same amount, yet the hospital or the cost of the procedure is exceeding that payment way beyond. And I want to focus on just one of the top ones. So let's look at the respiratory that Connecticut had. And looking here, this is a big range for just Connecticut. So if you go to one hospital in Connecticut, this is zip code 06117 compared to zip code 06504. That's a big gap in the charge for the respiratory procedure. And again, we go from 0K to 80K and then 0K to 20K. So that's a big difference when an older person has to try to cover it, which doesn't happen. So hospitals, again, are going into debt and nurses are going into strike. This is just another visual of the same thing, just to show, these procedures are costing a lot of money and Medicare is not able to cover it. So again, let's just go to Connecticut. And again, let's just focus on 177. It's easier to focus on one thing right now. If you wanted to go deeper into the data, it would probably be good to look at more, but for this project, I just want to focus on one so we can get the idea. So again, this Stanford is charging close to 70,000. Medicare is paying 15,000, and it's just not adding up. And so, like, looking at it by, alright, so Stanford's paying the average covered charge. Let's again change this so we can concentrate on our 177. Stanford is at close to 70,000, while down here, Wallingford is 8,000. Same procedure. So the question is, why are these costs so varied, and how can we fix this problem? Granted, these are bigger, we know by name, these are bigger cities or towns, so that might be the reason, but we really need to figure out this problem to save the industry and to have good hospitals. Now this is another view I wanted to look at. I wanted to look at the top 5 states for the median of the average covered cost, and we have New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Texas, California, and we can change this too if we want to look at more. Connecticut's still not in there. In Connecticut's like 16 or maybe not. Yeah, so Connecticut's not that bad, but these other states are tend to be more expensive, so this is where you might see more strikes. And this is just the bottom if you wanted to do a comparison with the bottom. Same thing. This is a deeper dive into procedures, and again, I'm just looking at the 177, the respiratory one that we've been concentrating on, and I wanted to look at this procedure compared to states. What's the deal? And these are total discharges. So the average number of covered charges for California was close to 100,000, and the total discharges were 6,000. So the total discharges is almost as if how many people they actually covered or charged this amount, and the average amount was almost 100,000. So you can see how it's a very current issue, and it's unfortunate that this data didn't have dates in it, because we could see the trend and how these payments have increased over the years. But that would be a good thing to look into next. After now that we know the current issue, it would be nice to look at that next and see how it changed over time. So the next step of this data analysis would be to make this transparent, make people realize what the actual issue is, make them understand why nurses are in strike for the reasons that I just showed you. And so now that we know why, we need to fix it. So how can we fix it? It really comes down to starting to analyze the data and show it to people like us so we understand. And this is a great article if you have time to read about it, and it talks about that. Thanks, guys. I had a wonderful time in the class, and I hope everybody has a great 4th of July weekend.